It's Valentine's Day, love is in the air, flowers are exponentially more expensive, and all the chocolate is flying off the shelves faster than a Barracuda in a rainstorm. And yet, here you are. Whether you be booed up or maidenless, only God knows why you decided to watch a video about Pokemon breeding today of all days. There is probably something to be said about the fact that I'm making this video in the first place, but no matter. You are here to learn and I am here to teach. Make sure to turn this video to max volume and play it for everyone to hear. I promise it's not gonna get weird. Breeding has existed since nearly the dawn of the Pokemon games, being introduced in Generation 2. There are a few exceptions post-Gen 2, namely the Let's Go games and Legends Arceus, but every other mainline game has the feature in some way, shape, or form. The process has a number of purposes used by a plethora of subsects of the Pokemon community as well. Need some babies for your decks? Well, might I interest you in an incense? Or maybe you're just looking for a discolored version of your favorite Pokemon, because the Masuda method has you covered on that one. Or you could just be hoping for the perfect Incineroar so you can annoy the hell out of everyone at your local VGC event. You could do that, I suppose, if you really want to be that guy. The point is, it's a wonderful tool and it's been useful since its inception, but we'll touch on all those individual topics later on. What you gotta know right now is that if you take two Pokemon, toss them into a daycare together, nature will take its course and you'll be left with an egg. After walking around for a little bit, whispering sweet nothings to the polka-dotted oval, the egg is gonna hatch into a Pokemon. Unfortunately, that is not where our lesson ends though. I know, believe me, I want this to be over as badly as you do. My wife is on a business trip at the moment, and she left the kids to stay with their grandma, and Cheryl doesn't like me very much. So yeah, I'd love to go home, sit down with a pack of Coors, turn on the game, and forget about my vivid dreams about being served, but all of you wanted to learn about the Bombardiers and the Beedrills. So shut up, give me like 10 more minutes, and I'll buy us Domino's or something, alright? There are a lot of factors that go into breeding, but let's just start from square one. Gender. In order to produce an egg, you need to have both a male and a female Pokemon in the daycare at once. But there are genderless Pokemon, Professor Skinny. What about them? I hear you shouting from behind your screen. Well, first of all, keep calling me that because Professor feels really good. And second of all, you would be correct. There are a lot of genderless Pokemon in these games, but they are unable to breed with anything else. That is except for the one exception, which is a neutral party in the form of a Ditto. The pink blob can breed with almost anything, unbreedable Pokemon such as legendaries and mythicals excluded, producing an egg of whatever Pokemon it was set to breed with. There is one exception to the mythical rule, that being Phione and Manaphy, because you can technically breed them with the help of a Ditto, but we don't need to dwell on that. You may also ask about gender-specific Pokemon like Nidoking and Nidoqueen, seeing as they are part of the same family, but they are technically two different species. Interestingly, if you breed properly with either of the two branches, the egg produced could contain either a male or a female Nidoran. The only other instance of this is with Volbeat and Illumise, seeing as they are apparently just gendered forms of one another. When I think about it, it makes sense. I just never think about it. Weirdly enough, with the Nidorans, the females can only breed when in their base form, but the males can breed at any of the 3 stages of their evolution line. The important takeaway here is that Ditto can breed with almost anything, regardless of gender or egg group. So this part is weird. There are 15 different egg groups in these games, and we already went over 2 without you noticing, those being the Ditto and the No Eggs Discovered groups, but that still leaves 13 to be discussed. There's Mineral, which refers to any inorganic Pokemon like Geodude and Klink. Amorphous, referring to any Pokemon with no definite form like Muck and Spiritomb. There's Grass, which is just plant-like Pokemon like Morlul, go figure. And there are 3 different water groups because apparently they're just that important. 1 refers to any amphibians like Froakie, 2 is fish-like mons like Quillfish, and 3 is aquatic invertebrates such as Wiglet. And the list goes on. There are many cases of overlap between the different groups as well. I'll give you a couple examples while simultaneously naming off the remainder of the groups. It's called efficiency. Pokemon like Flygon, as of Gen 8, falls under both the Bug and Dragon groups, while still not being the eternally hoped for bug dragon type. Hawlucha, also as of Gen 8, falls under both the flying and human-like groups. Pikachu falls under field and fairy, and unsurprisingly, the monster group has a lot of overlap with dragon. Charizard, Trico, Helioptile, and Salazzle, to name a few. So why exactly do these egg groups matter? Well, how about you go and try to breed an Arbok and an Eevee, see what happens. To many people's surprise, including my own, it works. That's because Arbok and Eevee both fall under the field group, and as long as two Pokemon share even just one egg group, they are capable of breeding and producing an egg. What Pokemon is produced by the egg is entirely dependent on what species the mother is, so just keep that in mind. The big reason as to why this bit is so weird is because of some of these classifications. Like Machoke, for example, a literal man is considered human-like, which makes total sense, but hell if I would ever say that Scrafty is a dragon. There are also cases of Pokemon not really fitting their classifications in their current forms, but their evolutions actually make a lot of sense. Magikarp and Feebas are not dragons, but Gyarados and Milotic, I can get behind that. And on the inverse, there are Pokemon like Frostlass who make a lot of sense under the fairy group, but Snorunt and Glalie do not. I'll leave a list of links in the description just in case you are curious as to what's compatible with what and the inherent oddities that follow. Get it? Because the next topic is inheritance, and I don't know how to introduce that, and I don't want to do a hard cut because I feel like this needs to be a little bit more structured, and yeah, I don't know. I'll just go. Sorry. Bad segues aside, another useful part of the whole breeding process is the aspect of creating what is essentially the perfect life form by having the Pokemon to be inherit various characteristics from its parents. There are a lot of little pieces to this little mini puzzle, so let's just start with a simple one for your simple mind. The moves that a freshly hatched Pokemon knows depends on the learn set for whichever generation you're hatching it in. For example, if you were to hatch a Togepi in Gen 9, it would only know Growl and Pound, as those are the only two moves that it knows at level 9. But in Gens 2 and 3, Pokemon actually hatch at level 5. So if you take that same Togepi and hatch it in Emerald, it's going to be left with a moveset of Growl, Charm, and Metronome. A real good testament to just how god-awful the Gen 3 level up movesets are. But that's just the moves that it knows by default, so let's just dive a little further in. If both of Togepi's parents, regardless of their marital problems that implement a continuously growing rift in their family dynamic, know a move that sweet little P can learn by level up, she'll know it too. Like if both Todd and Teresa were to continue to wish that the other would end up in a roadside ditch, P would just get to wish right along with them. Prior to Gen 6, if Todd specifically were to know any TMs or HMs from the given game, P would inherit those as well. If either Todd or, as of Gen 6, Teresa were to know an egg move that P can learn, she'd take on that move too. Unlucky for our cute little egg, mommy and daddy are a little too busy having one of their talks to teach sweet little P any egg moves. It's a good thing that that family of Sirfetch'd moved in right down the street, because P has always wanted to learn Peck. Now, if you want to be the essence of Sweat and bring a gun to a knife fight through the means of the perfect Incineroar that I mentioned earlier, this next bit is for you. It's time to learn about IVs, everyone. It's fine, just a quick little side quest, I promise. Essentially, all you need to know about IVs, or individual values if you really want to be a nerd, is that they are a set of values ranging from 0 to 31 hidden within the coding of every single Pokemon to help determine its stats. Let's take a look at P again. Don't worry, it's fine. Her parents decided that she was the reason for all of their constant fighting, so they left her for dead, and now she's my little guinea pig. P has a base defense stat of 65. That means that at level 1, she has a defense stat of 6, regardless of IVs. But this is when it gets weird. As you can see, by the time that she reaches level 5, the defense stat actually varies between the highest, lowest, and median IV count by a full stat point. And as her level increases even more, the difference becomes quite drastic. And when P finally reaches her max level of 100, her ability to defend against physical attacks almost entirely depends on her IVs. With max defense, the Skarmory that Todd and Teresa sent to and I quote, rid of their biggest mistake, could fail his mission when sending a steel wing into P. But if her IVs are any less than 6, Todd and Teresa are guaranteed to be rid of their one and only child. No, I'm sorry. Let me, come here. I didn't mean it. I'm not gonna let them hurt you. Don't even worry. You know what? Cheryl can keep the kids. I don't need them if I have you. Anyways, I'm sorry. Anyways, where was I? Oh yeah. So now that you know how IVs work and are also traumatized by P's upbringing, it's time for you to learn how they get inherited. This does depend on the generation in which you're breeding, so I'll give a quick summary as to each of the generations and how they differ from one another. I am going to be using notes for this because I'm a horrible teacher. All right, here we go. In Gen 2, the baby inherits IVs from the parent of the opposite gender, or the ditto in those specific cases. Defense is passed on, while the special stat, later split into SPDEF and SPATICA, has a 50% chance to be passed on to a T, and a 50% chance to be passed on with a plus or minus 8 modifier, depending on if the IV is between 0 and 7, or 8 and 15 respectively. Attack and speed are entirely random, and the HP depends on the other 4 stats. In Gen 3, specifically Fire Red Leaf Green, exactly 3 IVs are inherited, while the other 3 are completely random. In Emerald, it's similar, but way more complicated. Essentially, the IVs are passed one at a time with the potential to override one another, and the remaining IVs are completely random. Gen 4 didn't really change much, only adding ways to manipulate exactly what IVs are passed on through the use of held power items, and the only other change was in Gen 6, making it so a held Destiny Knot will result in 2 additional IVs being passed for a total of 5. There are just a few more things that are passed on, but they're all fairly simple, so I'll just kind of rapid fire them so we can get this lesson over with, because that Coors is not going to drink itself. It's also going to get warm, and that's gross. After natures were introduced in Gen 3, those were clearly a contender for inheritance, so if the mother or the ditto is holding an Everstone, there is a 50% chance that the baby takes on the same nature as the Everstone bearer. Nothing much changed in Diamond Pearl Platinum, but Heart Gold Soul Silver made it so the father could also pass on their nature through the same process. Black and White 2 made it so the parent's nature was no longer a coin flip, but rather guaranteed, and the final change came with the introduction of mints, having it so that if you change the parent's nature via one of these handy items, the baby will inherit whatever the parent's original nature was. Abilities, also introduced in Gen 3, were not inheritable until Gen 5, where there was high amounts of favoritism toward the mother, with it being an 80% chance for the baby to inherit its ability from mom. Breeding with Ditto would cause abilities to not be passed on whatsoever. This was changed in Gen 6, however, and has remained the same to this day. When it comes to hidden abilities, the story is a little bit different. In Black and White, if the female has a hidden ability, there is a 60% chance it is passed on, and in Black and White 2, the odds are boosted to 80%. When they made away with the Ditto restrictions in Gen 6, however, they also reversed this boost, bringing the odds back down to 60%. The different forms a Pokemon can take on, whether it be regional or specific to that Pokemon, are another thing that can be inherited, most of the time being based on the mother. Go figure. Burmy, for example, will hatch into the cloak of its mother Wormadam, but if bred between a Mothim and a Ditto, it will always emerge with the plant cloak. Pokemon like Oricorio will inherit whatever style the parent falls under, and in a very interesting case, Rockruff has multiple forms that it can pass. Not Lycanroc, but Rockruff. That's because a Rockruff with the ability Own Tempo, the means to which you can evolve it into its Dusk form, is considered a different form entirely. Pokemon like Furfrou and Sinistea will always hatch into their default forms, because getting an antique Poltegeist will never be that easy. And when it comes to regional forms, it depends on what region the breeding takes place in. A Wooper in Scarlet and Violet will always be Paldean, Meowths in Sun and Moon will always be Alolan, and so on. Unless you happen to have an Everstone handy, because they really like using Everstones for this stuff. With an Everstone, a Quagsire will always produce a Jotonian Wooper, and your Cantonian Persian will not produce a Thought Daughter. Thank the Lord. I hate the, like Meowth is fine, Alolan Meowth is fine, but what is this? What is this? What is a Alolan Persian? Who hurt this thing? Now, if you're a sadistic little man like myself, and you think that the prospect of getting a collection of off-colored Pokemon sounds like a lot of fun, well then breeding is actually kind of important for you. This is for a number of reasons, but we'll just focus on the big one, the Masuda method. I did already talk about this method in my shiny Pokemon are weird video, so if you're curious to learn more about the method or just shinies in general, definitely check it out after you're done with this lesson. But otherwise, in the meantime, a quick little rundown. Starting in Gen 4, the process of breeding became a wonderful tool for getting shinies. I do suppose that Gen 2 was actually the first to introduce an increased shiny efficiency method, but I don't think that Game Freak intended for a 1 in 64 shiny odds, so we'll just ignore that one. Basically, if you breed two Pokemon that have differing languages of origin, the shiny odds for the eggs that they produce shoots up exponentially. And as new gens continued to release, more and more things were added to the games to make the process of shiny hunting just a little bit easier. Like in Gen 5, they introduced the shiny charm, Gen 6, they cut the odds in half, you know, all that stuff. I'm realizing that this is not what we're talking about breeding, but I just kind of wanted to touch on it because I'm obsessed with shiny hunting a little bit. It's kind of a plague on my mind, I'm not gonna lie. One little bit about shiny hunting that I do want to touch on because it's actually pretty relevant to what we're talking about today is that in Gen 8 they actually tried to make it easier to like hatch shinies through like breeding in general, but they ultimately failed because there was a bug in the game's code that not only didn't make it easier to get shinies from breeding in the Masuda method, but actually made it harder to get shinies in general. It's a little bit of a bummer that it did something to the regular odds, but I'm glad it didn't do anything to Masuda because otherwise this video would have taken at least 4 years to complete. If you're just looking to fill out your decks and those pesky babies are giving you the slip, well, breeding actually holds one final secret that will help you out in the form of incense. There are actually a handful of Pokemon who prior to Gen 9 could produce 2 different eggs. For example, if you were to breed an Azumarill in hopes of getting the baby form Azurill to add to your decks, you would only be left with a Marill. But if you attach a Sea Incense onto that same Azumarill, you'll get exactly what you're looking for. There are 8 more examples of this as well. Like if you need a Wynot, you'll need to put a Lax Incense on your Wobbuffet. If you need a Budew, you gotta put a Rose Incense on either a Roselia or a Roserade. If you're looking for Chingling, you need a Pure Incense on your Chimecho. If you want a Bonsly, you need to put a Rock Incense on your Sudowoodo. For Mime Jr., you'll need to put an Odd Incense on either a Mr. Mime or a Mr. Rhyme. A Luck Incense on either of the 2 Nurse Joy assistants will produce a Happiny. You'll get plenty of Mantikes if you put a Wave Incense on your Mantine. And lastly, if you really don't want to waste your life looking for Munchlax through the stupid honey trees in Platinum, which I would totally understand, you can just put a full incense on a Snorlax and you'll be good. But joke's on you because Snorlax isn't obtainable in Platinum, so you just need to strap in and hope for the 0.2% chance of finding a Munchlax. I hate the honey trees, they piss me off. And that concludes our lesson for today. I hope that you learned something, and I hope that you're not too in shambles from learning about P's horrific origin story. I did skip over just a couple bits that I didn't find entirely necessary to talk about, like the inheritance of Pokeballs. But again, if you want to read more about all this stuff, I have that list of resources in the description below, so feel free to check those out at your leisure. And while you're down there, if you'd be so kind as to like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. We're shooting for the very ambitious goal of 5,000 subscribers by the end of 2025, so you subscribing, telling your friends and your family about me, that all helps a tremendous amount. That's about it for me today, but thank you for watching, and until next time, as always, have a good one, stay safe, and I'll see you around. I miss my wife and my kids, man. Hi. What are you still doing here? Class is over. You realize that, right? Don't mind me. I'm just cutting onions. What do you need? You promised them a thing, and of course they want you to deliver. What kind of pizza do you want?